The night it all unraveled started innocently enough. I was 6 months pregnant, my belly a gentle curve under my sweater, glowing with the anticipation of meeting my daughter. My husband, Ethan, was away on a business trip, managing the European arm of his parents' sprawling real estate empire, Hartwell Properties. I'd been living with his parents, Margaret and Richard Hartwell, in their sprawling Connecticut mansion while our own home was under renovation. It was supposed to be temporary, a cozy arrangement to keep me close to family during my pregnancy. But Margaret's cold stares and Richard's dismissive grunts had been chipping away at my resolve for weeks. That evening, I sat in the dining room, nibbling on roasted vegetables, trying to ignore Margaret's pointed silence. She was a woman of sharp edges, perfectly coiffed silver hair, lips pursed like she was perpetually sucking on a lemon. Richard, broad-shouldered and gruff, barely looked up from his phone. The air was thick with unspoken tension, but I chalked it up to their usual disapproval of May, a scholarship kid from a small town who'd somehow married their golden boy. "Clara," Margaret finally said, her voice slicing through the quiet like a blade. "We need to talk." I set down my fork, my heart thudding. "Is everything okay?" Richard glanced at Margaret, his jaw tight. "It's about Ethan." My stomach dropped. "Is he hurt? What's happened?" Margaret's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "He's fine. Physically, at least. But we've learned something disturbing." She slid a manila envelope across the table. My hands trembled as I opened it, pulling out grainy photos of Ethan in a dimly lit restaurant, his arm around a woman with long, dark hair. They were laughing, their heads bent close, her hand resting on his. I felt the air leave my lungs. This can't be right." "Oh, it's right," Margaret said, her tone dripping with venom. "He's been seeing her for months. We hired a private investigator. You're not the only one he's been lying to, Clara." I stared at the photos, my vision blurring. Ethan, my Ethan, who'd kissed my forehead that morning before leaving for the airport, promising to call. The man who'd whispered names for our unborn daughter Lily, Emma, Rose. My fingers tightened around the photos, crumpling them. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered. Richard leaned forward, his voice low and final. "Because you're a liability now. This family has a reputation to uphold. We can't have you dragging us through the mud with your situation." "My situation?" I snapped, my voice rising. "I'm carrying your grandchild." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "A grandchild we're not even sure is Ethan's. Given how things are unraveling. Pack your things. You're leaving tonight." The room spun. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood. "You can't do this. This is my home. My family. This is our home." Margaret cut in. "And you're no longer part of this family." I stumbled upstairs, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I called Ethan, but it went straight to voicemail. Again and again. By the time I'd packed a single suitcase, the rain was torrential. Richard stood by the front door, holding an umbrella. The cab's waiting. I stepped into the storm, my world collapsing with every step. The cab dropped me at a motel on the outskirts of town, the neon sign flickering in the dark. I sat on the lumpy bed, staring at my phone, willing Ethan to call. He didn't. Instead, a text from Margaret arrived. "Don't contact us again. We'll handle Ethan." I cried until my throat was raw, my hands cradling my belly. Lily I'd chosen the name that morning kicked softly, as if reminding me I wasn't alone. That's when something shifted inside me. The grief hardened into resolve. They thought they could break me, discard me like trash. But I wasn't just Clara, the small-town girl who'd stumbled into their world. I was a fighter, and I'd spent years learning the ins and outs of Hartwell Properties while Ethan was too busy chasing deals or apparently other women. I opened my laptop, my fingers trembling as I logged into the company's cloud server. I'd been given access months ago to help with administrative work during my pregnancy. They hadn't revoked it yet. Files, contracts, financials, they were all there. And as I scrolled, I saw something that made my breath catch, a hidden folder labeled offshore accounts. I clicked, my heart racing. Pages of transactions, shell companies, and tax evasion schemes stared back at me. Margaret and Richard had been siphoning millions from the company for years, hiding it from Ethan, from the board, from everyone. This was leverage. This was power. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made a plan. They'd taken my home, my husband, my dignity, but I was carrying their grandchild, and I'd be damned if I let them take her future, too. By morning, I'd contacted a lawyer, an old friend from college who specialized in corporate law. "Clara," she said, her voice sharp with excitement, "if this is what you say it is, we can bury them." I smiled for the first time in hours. Then let's do it. I spent the next week in a haze of strategy and survival. The motel became my war room, its peeling wallpaper and flickering lights a backdrop to my growing resolve. I barely ate, my focus consumed by the files I'd copied before Margaret and Richard inevitably cut off my access. Sarah helped me sort through the data, offshore accounts in the Caymans, fake invoices, and shady deals with overseas developers. It was a house of cards, and I was about to pull the foundation out from under them. But first, I needed to know about Ethan. I hired my own private investigator, a grizzled man named Tom who smelled faintly of whiskey and had a knack for digging up dirt. "Give me a week," he said, and I did, though every day felt like a lifetime. I moved into a small apartment, using the last of my savings for the deposit. It wasn't mucho, one bedroom with a leaky faucet, but it was mine. And it was Lily's. I painted the nursery walls a soft yellow, a promise to my daughter that we'd be okay. Tom's report came in on a Tuesday. The photos were worse than I'd imagined. Ethan and the woman, her name was Vanessa, kissing in a hotel lobby, laughing in a park, sharing coffee in a cafe. But what hit harder was the timeline. Vanessa wasn't a fling. They'd been together for over a year. Before I was pregnant. Before we'd picked out Lily's name. My hands shook as I read the final detail. Vanessa worked at Hartwell Properties, a junior executive in the London office. Margaret and Richard had known about her for months and done nothing until they used her to justify throwing me out. I called Ethan one last time, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "Clara," he answered, his tone hesitant, like he knew what was coming. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why her? Why us?" He was silent for a long moment. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this. Ethan, your parents threw me out. I'm pregnant with your child. And you let them." "They said you left." He stammered. "They said you wanted out." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "They lied. And you believed them. We're done." I hung up, my heart shattering, but my resolve unbroken. Ethan was a coward, complicit in his parents' cruelty. But I wasn't fighting for him anymore. I was fighting for Lily, for myself, and for every ounce of justice I could wring from the Hartwells. Sarah and I met with a forensic accountant next, a wiry man named David who could sniff out financial fraud like a bloodhound. He confirmed what I suspected. Margaret and Richard had been skimming profits for years, funneling money into personal accounts while the company teetered on shaky financial ground. "They've been reckless," David said, adjusting his glasses. "The board doesn't know the half of it. If you bring this to them, they'll have no choice but to act." The board. Hartwell Properties had a board of directors-sold money types who valued stability and reputation above all else. Margaret and Richard controlled them through charm and intimidation. But I had something they didn't: evidence. I spent hours crafting a presentation, detailing every illicit transaction, every hidden account. Sarah coached me on how to present it, how to stand tall despite my growing belly and the weight of betrayal. But there was a problem. Margaret and Richard were cunning, and they'd already painted me as the unstable wife, the outsider who didn't belong. I needed an ally, someone inside the company who could vouch for me. That's when I remembered James, the CFO. He was older, quiet, with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. He'd always treated me with respect, unlike the rest of the Hartwell clan. I reached out, scheduling a discreet meeting at a coffee shop far from the company's sleek offices. James listened as I laid out the evidence, his face growing graver with each document. "Clara, this is explosive," he said, rubbing his temples. "But you're playing a dangerous game. They'll come for you." "I know," I said, my hand resting on my belly. "But they've already taken everything else. I'm not losing this fight." He nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "I'm in. Let's take them down." James had pulled strings to get me on the board's agenda, framing it as an urgent financial matter. I'd spent days preparing, memorizing every detail of the fraud, every transaction that could bury them. Sarah and David were in the room, too, ready to back me up with legal and financial expertise. The board 8 men and women in tailored suits watched me with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. I was the disgraced daughter-in-law. After all, the one they'd been told had abandoned the family. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice clear despite the nerves clawing at my chest. "I'm here to expose a pattern of fraud that threatens Hartwell Properties' future." I clicked the projector, and the first slide appeared, a graph showing millions funneled into offshore accounts. Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret stood, her voice icy. "This is outrageous. Clara is clearly unstable, lashing out because of personal issues. She has no right." "Sit down, Margaret," James interrupted, his tone sharp. "Let her finish." I continued, slide after slide, laying out the evidence: fake invoices, shell companies, emails between Margaret and Richard discussing how to hide the money. The board's skepticism turned to shock, then anger. Richard's face reddened, his fists clenched, but he stayed silent. He knew they were caught. When I finished, the room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Then, one of the board members, a silver-haired woman named Evelyn, spoke. "Clara, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof beyond these documents?" I nodded, pulling out a USB drive. "Everything is here, original files, unaltered. And I have witnesses." Sarah and David stood, corroborating my claims with their own analyses. The board deliberated for hours, sending us out of the room. Margaret and Richard followed, their eyes burning into me. "You'll regret this," Margaret hissed as she passed. I met her gaze, unflinching. "You already made me regret trusting you," I said. "This is just the beginning." The board's decision came swiftly. Margaret and Richard were suspended pending an investigation, and James was appointed interim CEO. They didn't fire them outright. Reputation still mattered, but their power was gutted. I wasn't done, though. I wanted control, not just revenge. Hartwell Properties was Ethan's inheritance, and by extension, Lily's. I wasn't going to let it crumble under their greed. I spent the next weeks working with James, digging deeper into the company's operations. The more we uncovered, the worse it got: mismanaged projects, over-leveraged loans, and a culture of fear that kept employees silent. I started meeting with department heads, using my outsider status to my advantage. I listened, asked questions, and proposed solutions. Slowly, I earned their trust. They saw me not as the pregnant wife of the boss's son, but as someone who cared about the company's future. Ethan called me one night, his voice slurred with desperation. "Clara, what are you doing? You're destroying my family." "Your family destroyed me first," I said, my voice cold. "You made your choice, Ethan. Now I'm making mine." He begged me to stop, to come back, to work things out. But I was done with his lies, done with the Hartwell's manipulations. I hung up, my focus on the next step, convincing the board to give me a leadership role. I wasn't a Hartwell by blood, but I was carrying one, and I'd proven I could outsmart them at their own game. Sarah helped me draft a proposal, a restructuring plan to stabilize the company, with me as a key advisor. It was bold, maybe even reckless, but I had nothing left to lose. The board was hesitant. My lack of formal experience was a sticking point, but James vouched for me, and the evidence of my in-laws' fraud tipped the scales. They agreed to a trial period, with me reporting directly to James. I moved into a small office at Hartwell Properties, my belly now impossible to hide. Employees whispered as I passed, but I didn't care. I was rewriting the narrative, brick by brick. And every night, as I rubbed my belly and felt Lily kick, I whispered to her, "We're going to win this, baby. For both of us." Lily's birth changed everything. She was perfect 7 pounds, dark curls, and eyes that seemed to hold a spark of defiance, just like her mother. I spent the first few days in a haze of new motherhood, learning to breastfeed, counting her tiny breaths, and marveling at her strength. But the outside world didn't stop. James called me from the office, his voice tense. "Margaret's hired a lawyer. They're claiming you fabricated the evidence." I laughed, though it was more exhaustion than amusement. "Of course they are. Let them try." Sarah met me at the hospital the day I was discharged, her laptop already open. "They're saying you hacked the system, that the files were planted. It's a weak defense, but they've got money and connections. We need to stay ahead." I nodded, cradling Lily in her carrier. "What's the plan?" "We go public," Sarah said. "Leak the evidence to the press. The board can't ignore a PR nightmare, and neither can the Hartwells." It was a risky move, but I was all in. We contacted a journalist at a major financial outlet, someone known for exposing corporate corruption. I handed over redacted versions of the files, enough to spark outrage without compromising the ongoing investigation. The story hit the next morning. Hartwell Properties rocked by fraud allegations. The stock plummeted, and the board called an emergency meeting. I couldn't attend. Lily was too young to leave, but James represented me, armed with my notes and Sarah's legal backing. The board was furious, not just at Margaret and Richard, but at the public embarrassment. They voted to oust the Hartwells permanently, stripping them of their titles and shares. It was a victory, but a hollow one. The company was in chaos, and someone had to step up. That someone was me. James offered me the role of interim COO, a position I'd never dreamed of holding. "You've got the instincts," he said, "and the employees trust you. We need you, Clara." I hesitated. Lily was barely a week old, and the weight of motherhood was overwhelming. But I thought of her future, of the empire I could build for her. I accepted, on one condition: flexible hours and a nursery in the office. The board agreed, desperate to stabilize the company. My first day as COO was surreal. I walked into Hartwell Properties with Lily in a sling, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. Employees stared, some with admiration, others with doubt. I didn't care. I had a job to do. I spent the day meeting with department heads, reviewing budgets, and outlining a recovery plan. The company was bleeding money, but I saw opportunities, undervalued properties, untapped markets, and a workforce eager for change. Margaret and Richard didn't go quietly. They filed a lawsuit, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. Sarah was ready, countersuing for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The legal battle was brutal, but the evidence was on our side. Every court filing, every headline, chipped away at their legacy. Ethan reached out again, this time in person. He showed up at my apartment, his eyes red-rimmed, his suit wrinkled. "Clara, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I messed up. I know that. But Lilith's my daughter, too. I looked at him, the man I'd once loved, and felt nothing but pity. You don't get to claim her now, Ethan. You chose Vanessa. You chose your parents. Lily and I are moving forward without you. He left. His shoulders slumped, and I closed the door, my heart heavy but resolute. Lily was my reason, my strength, and I was building something bigger than the Hartwells could ever imagine. The lawsuit was a spectacle, drawing media from across the country. Margaret and Richard sat stiffly, their faces etched with defiance. But I could see the cracks in Richard's trembling hands, Margaret's forced smile. Sarah had prepared me for their tactics. They'd paint me as a scorned wife, a gold digger who'd manipulated the system. But I had the truth, and the truth was a weapon. Their lawyer, a slick man named Harper, grilled me for hours. "Ms. Thompson," he said, sneering, "you expect us to believe you, a former administrative assistant with no formal business training, uncovered this alleged fraud on your own." I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "I expect you to believe the evidence. Bank records don't lie. Emails don't lie. Your clients, however, do." The courtroom murmured, and Sarah hid a smile. Harper faltered, but pressed on, questioning my motives, my marriage, even my pregnancy. I answered every question, my eyes locked on Margaret's. She looked away first. The turning point came when James testified. As CFO, his word carried weight. He detailed how I'd brought the fraud to his attention, how he'd verified the evidence himself. "Clara saved this company," he said. "She's not the villain here." The judge ruled in our favor, dismissing the Hartwells' claims and upholding their termination. The media frenzy intensified, with headlines like "Pregnant Wife Exposes In-Law's Fraud, Takes Over Empire." I hated the attention, but it served a purpose. It cemented my authority. Back at Hartwell Properties, I threw myself into rebuilding. I hired new talent, streamlined operations, and sold off non-performing assets. Employees who'd once whispered about me now sought my advice, their respect hard-earned but genuine. I brought Lily to the office daily, her crib in a corner of my office, her laughter a reminder of why I was fighting. But the Hartwells weren't done. Margaret called a press conference, tearfully claiming she and Richard were victims of a corporate coup. It was a desperate move, and it backfired. The public, already swayed by the fraud allegations, turned on them. Social media was ruthless, with hashtags like Hartwell fraud trending for weeks. Ethan tried to reach out again, this time through a lawyer, requesting visitation with Lily. I consulted Sarah, who advised me to tread carefully. "He's still her father," she said, "but you set the terms." I agreed to supervised visits, but only after Ethan signed a legal agreement waiving any claim to Hartwell Properties. He was broken, a shadow of the man I'd married, but I felt no satisfaction, only relief that Lily and I were free. By the end of my first year as COO, the company was turning a profit again. The board, impressed by the turnaround, offered me the CEO position permanently. I accepted, my heart swelling with pride. I'd taken a crumbling empire and made it my own, not for revenge, but for Lily, for the future I'd promised her. The company's annual gala was a glittering affair, all champagne and chandeliers. But I felt the weight of every eye on me as I stepped onto the stage. As CEO, I was no longer the outcast. I was the architect of Hartwell Properties' rebirth. But as I looked out at the crowd, I saw Margaret and Richard, uninvited but defiant. And I knew the night wasn't over. The gala was meant to celebrate the company's recovery and new headquarters, a soaring stock price, and a rebrand that emphasized transparency and community. I wore a deep blue gown, my hair swept up, Lily's tiny handprint necklace resting against my chest. She was with a sitter tonight, safe and warm, but her presence was with me as I mingled with investors and employees. The speech was my moment to cement my legacy. I spoke of resilience, of rebuilding trust, of a future where Hartwell Properties wasn't just a name, but a force for good. The applause was thunderous, but my eyes caught Margaret and Richard slipping in through a side door. They weren't supposed to be here. Security had strict instructions, but their audacity didn't surprise me. After my speech, Margaret approached, her smile venomous. "You think you've won, Clara? This company was ours before you were born. You're nothing without us." I met her gaze, unflinching. "You built it on lies. I rebuilt it with truth. Enjoy the party, Margaret. It's the last one you'll attend." Security escorted them out, but not before Richard muttered, "This isn't over." I knew it wasn't. They were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. The next morning, a new headline hit. Former Hartwell execs allege CEO misconduct. Margaret and Richard had gone to a rival outlet, claiming I'd bribed board members and fabricated evidence. It was a lie, but it stirred enough doubt to make the stock dip. I called an emergency board meeting, presenting every document, every email, every piece of evidence again. The board stood by me, but the damage was done. Public perception was shaky, and I needed to act fast. I launched a PR campaign, sharing my story, not just the fraud, but my journey as a pregnant woman cast out, fighting for her daughter. I did interviews, wrote op-eds, and even posted a photo of Lily and me on the company's social media, captioned, "This is why we fight." The response was overwhelming. Employees shared their own stories of resilience, and clients praised our transparency. The stock rebounded, stronger than ever. But Margaret and Richard had one last card to play. They reached out to Ethan, convincing him to sue for custody of Lily, claiming I was an unfit mother consumed by corporate ambition. The accusation cut deep, but Sarah was ready. We countersued, presenting evidence of Ethan's absence and infidelity. The court was swift. I retained full custody, with Ethan granted limited visitation. As the legal battles faded, I focused on the future. I launched a foundation under Hartwell Properties, funding affordable housing and women's shelters. It was my way of giving back, of ensuring no one else felt as alone as I had that rainy night in the motel. Lily's first birthday was a quiet affair. Just the two of us in our new homey, modest house with a garden where she could play. As I watched her giggle, smearing cake on her face, I realized I'd done more than survive. I'd built a legacy. The Hartwells were a shadow of their former selves, and I was the woman who'd taken their empire and made it something better. The final blow to Margaret and Richard came quietly. A federal investigation, sparked by my initial leaks, led to their arrest for tax evasion and fraud. They pleaded guilty, avoiding prison but losing what little wealth they had left. The mansion was sold, their social circle dissolved, and their name became synonymous with disgrace. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. Their downfall was their own doing. Ethan faded from our lives, his visits with Lily sporadic and strained. I didn't hate him anymore. I just felt sorry for him. He'd chosen the wrong side, and now he was alone. I focused on raising Lily, teaching her strength and kindness, showing her that family was what you built, not what you were born into. Hartwell Properties thrived under my leadership. We expanded into sustainable development, earning awards for innovation and community impact. The board, once skeptical, now saw me as indispensable. James became my mentor and friend, guiding me through the complexities of corporate life while I balanced motherhood. One evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she grabbed my finger, her eyes bright. "Mama strong," she said, her first words. I laughed, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, baby," I whispered, "and you will be, too." Looking back, I realized the Hartwell's cruelty had been my catalyst. They'd tried to break me, but instead, they'd forged me into something stronger. I wasn't just Clara, the small-town girl, or Clara, the betrayed wife. I was Clara Thompson, CEO, mother, survivor, And as I stood in my office, looking out at the city skyline, I knew I'd given Lily more than an empire ride, given her a story of resilience, of turning pain into power. The world would know the Hartwells as a cautionary tale, but they'd know me as the woman who rose from their ashes. And that was enough.